In the previous how-to videos you learned quite important things already. All these settings, however, are somewhat incomplete without actual email channels for the communication with your customer. We will handle Microsoft 365 channels with filters, signatures and the general email settings for this reason today. This video will not help you if you're looking to hook up normal IMAP and POP3 mailboxes or Google-based email accounts. I will provide this in the next video for a better overview. If you're looking to connect a regular email account, watch my previous video that handles that already. All the things I'm going to show you are based on a paid Microsoft 365 Business Basic EVR subscription, without any Copilot and Teams in the subscription. Depending on your subscription, you might have more or other options than I have. Also, my tenant does not require admin consent, which makes my scope slightly easier and different. Zammad does support admin consent. The basics should be the same though. All what we are doing here technically also works with personal Microsoft accounts. Before we create a new required Microsoft 365 app for Zammad, let's prepare our mailbox first. I'm going to use a shared mailbox without an assigned license. This has some limitations, for example you cannot log in directly with said mailbox, but saves additional cost. In some situations you will still need a license. I converted the affected mailbox to a shared mailbox already. Within delegation you will have to add the user in question to the send as and read and manage delegations. I'm choosing my trustworthy user John Doe here. That user has no administrator permissions. Now that we have that prepared, we can continue with the actual app. This will give Microsoft time to apply the changes I requested in the meanwhile. The Zammad installation I'm showing to you is available internally on my local LAN only. Microsoft does not have to contact your instance at any time. All authentication requests to Zammad's callback URLs will be handled over the user's browser. However, Microsoft does require HTTPS encrypted connections no matter where the web URL directs to. In order to add your Microsoft 365 mailbox, no matter if via Graph API or IMAP, you will need a Microsoft 365 app first. To do so, navigate to portalazure.com and log in with a tenant admin account. Search for app registration and open it. In this area, Microsoft will display all configured apps you have. In my case, we don't have any apps. Even if I would have any, I would want to create one for Zammad only. For that we hit Register an application. Now this page regularly changes, so it might look different for you at some point. I'm choosing Zammad as app name here. Choose a wording that fits your use case best. Within supported account types, you can define what user groups can use this app. This mainly is relevant for those of you that have several tenants. However, it can also be relevant if you want your customers to log in, but that's a different story for another video. If you have only one tenant and do not need to accept any other, single tenant only is your best pick. By choosing multiple Entra ID tenants, you can specify all tenants allowed to use this application. Here you can configure all other tenants apart from the one you're creating the app in. To allow all tenants, including personal Microsoft accounts, use any Entra ID and personal Microsoft accounts. This option is most likely only relevant for authentication with customers only. Last but not least, you can allow end-user accounts with personal accounts only. What you have to choose here depends on your use case. Don't worry in case your decision proves to be wrong later. You can adjust it if needed. Now for the redirect URL, head to your Zammad instance and go to the Microsoft 365 channel you want to configure. As I'm going to show both variants, I'll be choosing the Microsoft 365 IMAP channel variant in this case. Click on Connect Microsoft 365 app and copy your callback URL. Paste this URL into the redirect URL field and select Web in case it is not yet selected. In case you need to add a second URL, head to Manage and then Authentication Preview. There you can add further web redirects as needed. What's next is to add the API permissions Zammad requires. These depend on the Microsoft channel type you're going to add. Generally, I would suggest going with a Graph API channel. This is especially needed if you want to use shared mailboxes. Within Manage, go to API Permissions and choose Add a Permission. Unlike what the button suggests, you can actually search and tick several permissions without hitting Add. All the API permissions we are going to add can be found within Microsoft Graph and then Delegated Permissions. No matter the channel, you will need the permission OpenID, Profile and Offline Access for both variants. If you're adding the Microsoft 365 IMAP channel, also add the permissions Email, IMAP access as user all, and SMTP send. In case you're adding the Microsoft 365 Graph channel, add the permissions mail read write, mail send, mail read write shared, and mail send shared. Back in the application overview, you can optionally configure the option Managed Application in Local Directory, or as in different wording, Admin Consent. This will add enterprise-grade security options to your app and might be required in very hardened tenants by default. In this new submenu of Enterprise Applications, browse to Manage and then Properties. Here you can enable assignment required, which requires you to explicitly grant access to given users and groups. After saving, head to Users and Groups on the left. You can assign all users that are allowed to use this app. After assigning users, you can optionally head to Security and then Permissions. In this area, you can give administrative consent for the permissions and the assigned user the app requests. If you don't do this, you will have to use the Zammad Request Admin Consent button in the management after configuring the API access. To reduce the complexity of this video, I will simply grant administrative consent here. Back into your app within App Registrations, now head to Manage and then Certificates and Secrets. Change to Client Secrets if needed. This is the place where you can create required API secrets for Zammad to use. As of now, you are limited to 24 months of token lifetime. To reduce the downtime of your Zammad instance, you should create a reminder for a day or two prior to expiration, so that you can change the API secrets in time. More on that later, after we added a mailbox. Copy the secret value and paste it into Zammad's client secret field. Ensure to not copy the secret ID by accident. Now head to the app overview and copy the application client ID and paste it into the Zammad's client ID field. Also, you can optionally provide the tenant UUID. You shouldn't do this if you intentionally want to or have to provide access to your app from several tenants. This can be relevant for shared mailboxes or if you generally want to add mailboxes from other tenants than yours. If you exclusively use mailboxes in the same tenant, it's safe to provide the tenant ID. This is the case for my showcase. After submitting, the management area changes. If you want to use both Microsoft 365 channels, keep in mind that those credentials are not shared. So you will have to repeat the previous steps, at least for the credentials. Now that we have the application and API connection set up, it's time to connect the first mailbox to it. By pressing Add Account, you will be redirected to Microsoft's login page. Usually you can select already logged in accounts here or provide credentials to a different account. After authenticating, Microsoft will redirect you back to your Zammad instance. Quick look on the dialog of the Microsoft 365 IMAP email channel. The channel's mailbox configuration dialog will open, allowing you to configure the destination group, the option to change the outgoing email address of that destination group, a folder to look for emails, and the option to optionally keep the messages on the server. Generally, you should carefully decide if you want to keep all messages on the server. Over the time, your mailbox can get out of quota, which you have to monitor manually. Also, and this is important to note, if you choose to keep messages on the server, Zammad will only fetch unread emails. All mails that are read beside of Zammad will be ignored. Now for contrast, let's take a look at the Microsoft 365 Graph email channel. As you can see, the first thing Zammad needs to know is if you want to add a normal user mailbox or a shared mailbox. Choosing user mailbox will behave similar to the Microsoft 365 IMAP channel after authentication. If you select shared mailbox, you will be prompted for the email address of the shared mailbox. You are then redirected to the user authentication for the Microsoft account that's allowed to access the shared mailbox. After that, you're redirected back to Zammad and the mailbox dialog opens. Now you can configure the destination group, the option to change the outgoing email addresses of said destination group, a folder to look for mails, and the option to optionally keep the messages on the server. Generally, you should carefully decide if you want to keep all messages on the server. Over the time, your mailbox can get out of quota, which you have to monitor manually. What follows now is the exact same for both channel types. After submitting these settings, Zammad will take its first look into the connected mailbox. If Zammad detects existing emails in your mailbox, it will also offer you to run an archive import on the mailbox. The archive import has serious advantages for older emails. You can tell Zammad what state these emails should be imported in. These tickets will be closed by default, which makes a lot of sense for archived emails. It will also cause no trigger-based messages and also no agent notifications to be created. This creates the least noise possible. In order for Zammad to pull only the right emails as archived emails, you will have to define the cutoff time. Every message that is older than the date and time will be considered an archived message. Anything after that will behave exactly the same like you would expect it to be in Zammad. Archived and closed tickets in general can always be found via Zammad's powerful full-text search. If you don't want Zammad to import messages in archive mode, use the skip button on the lower left. If you click on Submit instead, Zammad will run the archive mode in the way you configured it. After submitting, the channel will automatically be enabled and begin to fetch emails. That's basically all it takes to add a mailbox. Aliases that are configured for the mailbox will not be taken into account. Zammad will only add the primary email address. Due to how Microsoft 365 channels work and Microsoft's continued effort to disallow legacy authentication methods, Zammad's notification channel is not really supported. This is troublesome if you're planning on using Zammad's notification channel with your Microsoft tenant. In the Microsoft universe, you still have some options, depending on your security configuration. An option could be to use high-volume email accounts. However, these require SMTP auth and legacy authentication, which by default is disabled. Also, these accounts are allowed to send emails internally only. Your best shot currently is to configure a connector in your Exchange server. As Microsoft doesn't support IPv6 addresses for whitelisting of static IP addresses, you will be forced to configure a postfix locally. This postfix has to use certificates in the sendout that you can whitelist in the connector. This kind of relay setup is manageable, however not trivial. Leave a comment if I should create a video on this matter. Managing Microsoft 365-based channels is quickly explained. By using the Edit option next to Inbound, you can change the destination group and the corresponding outgoing email address of said group. Also, you can adjust the folder Zammad fetches emails from. You can also change the keep messages on server behavior. A fair word of warning on that regard. If emails were kept on the server before, changing the setting to no, so removing emails, will cause Zammad to fetch all messages from the mailbox. This might be unexpected to you, so remove all read emails to either a subfolder or remove them beforehand. Clicking on the group name basically gives you a small subset of the dialog you've just seen. You can adjust the destination group based information here too. On the right-hand side, Zammad lists all configured email addresses of the mailbox. You can add further email aliases here or remove existing ones. However, keep in mind that these aliases will have to exist in the mailbox's configuration within Exchange too. Changes you apply to Exchange will usually take up to 15 minutes to take effect. Zammad does not synchronize the available aliases and thus requires you to go that extra mile. Please be aware that Microsoft overrides the alias in the from address. This behavior especially affects shared mailboxes and cannot be overridden. The same applies to Mailbox's display name. That is a Microsoft 365 restriction. As your application secrets expire after some time, you will need to rotate them. The easiest way to do so is to head to the secret section of your app registration. There, add a new secret with a new lifetime and copy the secret value. Now head to Zammad and click on the Configure app to replace the application secret with a new one. Ideally, you're doing this upfront, allowing Zammad to automatically rotate the secrets for your mailboxes. This rotation should happen within an hour or so. If your secret already expired, you will see an authentication error in the incoming and possibly outgoing channel portion. If that's the case, simply use the Re-authenticate button of your mailbox. Be careful to use the correct user account here, because otherwise the re-authentication will fail. You will have to repeat these steps for every affected mailbox. Due to the nature of how this app works, you cannot automate this. Zammad provides you with email filters. These filters can change the way an incoming message is being processed. It can even be ignored entirely. Zammad also comes with some default internal filters that you cannot see in the UI nor adjust. They are responsible for example, the follow-up detection and such. These filters are global. This means that it doesn't matter in which of Zammad's available email channels you configure these. You can reach the same tab content within email channels, Google channels and both Microsoft 365 type channels. Filters are generally considered in the order of their alphabetical naming. They can be cloned and removed as needed. When adding a new filter, you can provide a meaningful name to it. Ideally, the filter name gives a short hint on what it does, so that you can find it better. In the Match All of the Following section, you can filter for messages with specific attributes like the from or to header. You can also choose from a list of predefined headers to interact based on specific values. In the Perform Actions section, you can define what Zammad should do with a message based on the matches. Filters can adjust ticket attributes and tags. This can be done both in context of a ticket creation or ticket update. This allows you to even run different actions depending on the situation. The only downside on this is that the UI currently doesn't help you to differentiate the configuration very well. Additionally to that, a filter can adjust the visibility, message type and sender of the article that is going to be created. The message type by default would be email in this situation, but you could manipulate it to, for example, a phone note. Within sender you can choose in between the three user types Zammad knows: customer, agent or system. The last very specific option is to ignore the message. Use this with care because anything that matches your filter will cause Zammad to silently discard affected messages. You can use the note field for useful information for other admins or yourself. A very simple filter example would be based on the spam header of emails. This header exists on most installations, but its name might differ depending on the mail system. If you receive a message that has been detected as spam, you can automatically add a tag named spam and move it to a specific group. Of course, you could also use this to automatically close the incoming mail if your filter basically never messes up. Signatures are a must-have for emails. Of course, Zammad supports signatures. They can be dynamic to a certain point and are set on a group level. Agent-based signatures are not possible, however can still offer some level of personality for individual agents thanks to variables. Unlike filters, signatures cannot be removed but cloned only. These signatures are global. That means it doesn't matter in which of Zammad's available email channels you configured these. You can reach the same tab content within email channels, Google channels and both Microsoft 365 type channels. The configuration of a new or existing signature is fairly easy. Give it a meaningful name and then configure the content of the signature. As mentioned, you can use variables. To open a list of these, you can use two columns just like with text modules in the front end. The editor in this model supports all formattings that Zammad supports in general. Right now, formattings can only be achieved with keyboard shortcuts. You can even paste inline images into a signature. However, more complex signatures with links and tables are rather complicated. While you can use your browser's developer tools to adjust HTML content, this is rather troublesome. Note that not all HTML structures will work, because Zammad has a sanitizer that might get in your way here. For the sake of the length of this video, I will not go in further detail here. To configure your signatures to a group, head to your group configuration and select the signature you want. Now the last part of the email channel is the settings tab. Some of these settings are not available in software as a service because they are globally managed. These settings are global. That means that it doesn't matter in which of Zammad's available email channels you configure these. You can reach the same tab content within email channels, Google channels and both Microsoft 365 type channels. As mentioned earlier within the notification channel configuration, you can use the notification sender to adjust the sender address of the notification channel. By default, the value is notification master with no reply at systemfqdn of your Zammad installation. This value has to match the outgoing email configuration you have configured for notification, because otherwise the mail system will deny these notifications to be sent. With additional follow-up detection, you can configure how much data of an email Zammad uses to detect follow-ups on existing tickets. These settings can have a huge negative impact on the quality of detected follow-ups. By default, only subject and references is activated. It causes Zammad to check the subject of an email to find fitting existing messages and their message IDs. In some situations this is not enough. For this reason you can also use further references with the references setting. This will cause Zammad to also take message IDs from all articles of a ticket into account. That can be useful in some situations where email flows are rather chaotic. The next two options of the follow-up detection are rather dangerous and likely to cause false positive follow-ups. Use these with care. Attachments causes Zammad to look for references of messages with the attachment of a fetched email. For example, for messages that have been forwarded as an attachment. Last but not least, Buddy will look for ticket numbers and hooks in the body of a message. This one is the number one culprit for bad follow-up detections, because a simple phone number in the signature can cause Zammad to find a ticket number where there is none. This one should be your absolute last resort. Maximum email size defines the maximum allowed size of messages. By default this is 10 MB and can be a maximum of 150 MB. Please keep in mind that Zammad is not a file sharing platform and most email systems do allow something between 20 to 50 MB in total. Consider using tools that are made for sharing files, like Nextcloud, Cfile or similar. The maximum allowed email size setting has a direct data setting called Send Postmaster Mail if mail too large. The setting defaults to yes, which causes Zammad to automatically reply to the sender if the message was too big. The message requests the sender to reduce the message size and hints on the actual limit. Zammad installations that are older than Zammad 3.2 had a default of the setting set to no, to reflect the original behavior. Originally, Zammad would silently fetch the message and remove it from the mailbox if the keep messages on server setting was set accordingly and put the email into unprocessable mail. This has several downsides. The sender does not know that their message never came through and might expect an answer that never arrives. Also, the administrator has to take extra steps to drop the mail from unprocessables, causing extra workloads. Both scenarios are bad user experience, so my personal suggestion is to stick with yes here. With sender based on reply to header, you have important control over the way Zammad detects the ticket customer during the creation of a ticket. By default, the setting is unset, which means disabled. However, you can configure Zammad to not just take the reply to header in consideration, but also if you just want the email address and display name that's configured there to be customer values. This is not just relevant for the ticket article itself, which will override the from attribute, but also will cause Zammad to create new customers of unknown addresses in the correct way. The downside on this is that the sender address is being different from the actual value, which may be confusing in abuse situations. Agents have to pay extra attention here. The correct and original values can always be retrieved via the raw message of the article itself. You may wonder why this is relevant. Well, most companies use contact forms that send emails. Many of these forms act like they are sending as the actual sender. This is bad behavior because you're sending as email domains you technically not own. For this reason, it makes more sense to use a no-reply email address as sender address of said form. As you can't answer your customers conveniently that way, it makes sense to use the reply to header for that. This is where the circle closes. Now let's come to a rather special setting for ticket creations by email. Customer selection based on sender and receiver list is only relevant if an agent sends an email to Zammad. With the default setting being set to yes, this means that if the sender is an agent, Zammad will use the first user in the recipient list to be the customer of the ticket. If you set this to no, Zammad will use the agent's email address as ticket customer, if that is the sender. Be aware that agents require access permissions on the group of affected tickets, because Zammad doesn't have a customer-specific interface. Otherwise, they cannot see the tickets they are customer in. As Zammad can reply to any incoming email based on triggers automatically, this can be an issue with certain email addresses. Usually it doesn't make any sense to reply to no-reply email addresses, because they are used for sending email only. For this reason, you can configure block notifications on on-premise installations to tackle this. Any alias on this list will not receive any notifications from Zammad. The default setting usually is good enough in most scenarios. Earlier we had a look on Zammad's display names for email addresses. I mentioned that by default, Zammad will combine the agent's name with the display name. This is globally controlled with the setting sender format. In many scenarios, you might not want that the customer feels a somewhat soulless reply by a big ticket system. For this reason, you might want to choose agent name as option here. However, the downside, especially with Outlook, is that the display name will be stored in its internal address book. So even if a different agent answers, the first agent that answered at some point will always be the displayed name from the support email address. This might be undesired, which is why you can also set the setting to system address display name. This is the exact name of what you can configure for the email address. Should you stick with Zammad's default setting to use the agent name with a separator and the system address display name, you may want to take a look at sender format separator. This allows you to adjust the separator in between those two values. By default, this is wire. As Zammad basically is somewhat of an email client, it doesn't just support replying to emails, but also forwarding it. As any email client, Zammad appends specific default wording in the front of the subject if you're forwarding or replying to an email. This is controlled by ticket subject forward and ticket subject reply. If the default wording does not fit or you want to use a more specific one to your local language, you can adjust this with these two settings. The colon will automatically be added for you. Last but not least, Zammad limits its subject length to 110 characters by default. Using ticket subject size, you can adjust or decrease this limit as needed. If the subject is longer than the set limit, Zammad will shorten the string with an indication to ensure that the ticket slug and number, if enabled, is always visible. Note that this can also be troublesome if you communicate with a third-party ticket system. You may want to add both ticket numbers in front of the subject in these scenarios, to ensure the follow-up on both sides always works. There are some global settings you might not expect where to find them. As they are relevant for how Zammad behaves during the creation of email replies on a ticket, we should talk about these as well. These settings are available to any agent with administrator permissions. Administrators without access to tickets cannot adjust these. At the top within any ticket, you can find a little setting button too. This will open a modal with ticket editor related settings. When replying to an email in a ticket, the easiest way to do so is by using the Reply or Reply All button in the ticket. You may have noticed that if you do, all that is available to you is the To and CC field. You can optionally enable the subject field. If the subject field is disabled, the ticket title will be the subject. If you enable the subject field, the ticket title and subject of the message can be independent. Keep in mind that if your customer can log in, they will still see the ticket title. This may be relevant in some cases where the ticket titles are too complicated for whatever reason. While we are talking about the ticket titles, these can be adjusted by clicking into the title area. Clicking anywhere outside of this area will update the ticket title. The setting email full quote is much more important in my opinion. While it is turned off by default, agents can always mark the relevant text portion and click on reply to create a quotation. Quoting in general helps, especially with long ticket emails, to help the customer understanding the points you refer to easier. Of course, you can also enable the full quote. If you do, Zammad will always add a full quote of the message that you are using the reply button on. Don't worry, you can still select only a subportion of the text to only quote the relevant parts. Of course, you can also always break a quotation in smaller parts. The last email relevant setting is Email Quote Header. This allows you to disable the header Zammad adds to a quotation by default. This can be useful if you are not planning to tell the customer who exactly answered. These settings can be a game changer in the use of Zammad, so I hope they help you as well. Now that was quite a big chunk of settings. There's more settings that are hidden and only available via Zammad's Rails console. If you're using Zammad software as a service, drop the support a message if you want these to be adjusted. The following settings are related to emailing mainly, so I will not handle all available settings in Zammad here. Most companies that don't just handle support, but also financial data and depending on their location, are required to archive emails. Now, there are several ways to do this and this is no legal consultation. But at least for outgoing, the easiest approach might be to send all outgoing emails to an archive email mailbox via blind carbon copy. You can check the current value with setting get system_bcc. By default this will be empty. You can set your system BCC address like so. After setting this, Zammad will send a copy of all new outgoing emails to this address. A very crucial and helpful setting in my opinion is the option to also display the customer's email address during the ticket creation. This is extremely useful, especially if you have several customers with similar names and to verify the search returned the correct values. Enable UI user organization selector of the email by setting it to true. Disable it by using false, that is also the default. You can configure the font and font size Zammad shall use with HTML email CSS font. Please be aware that the font you choose here has to be supported by the receiving client. You should always also configure fallback fonts. Also, there's a huge difference in between px, so pixels, and pt, so points. Microsoft Office, for example, uses points over pixels, so the behavior might differ greatly if you stick with pixels here. This setting has an impact on outgoing emails only. It will not change any fonts in Zammad's user interface. The last very useful setting affects attachments in a ticket. Depending on how many articles you have in a ticket, the overview of all attachments of all articles gets somewhat lost. Zammad comes with the setting UI Ticket Zoom Sidebar Article Attachments that enables an attachment listing in the ticket sidebar. That way you have a chronicle list of attachments at hand. Please note that this does not cover inline attachments. I hope that this video helped you with the configuration of your Microsoft 365 channels and the settings that belong to it. Let me know your opinion in the comments. Until next time, take care.